The whispers of loneliness had become my constant companion. At 60, I'd grown accustomed to the hollow quiet of my home, the way the walls seemed to press closer each year. I'd spent decades building a life for others, raising a family, nurturing a marriage, only to find myself adrift after my husband's passing. But the true weight of solitude hadn't settled when he left. It crept in later, like a slow leak, until the silence felt heavier than grief. That evening, I sat on the porch watching the sun bleed into the horizon, the sky a battleground of fading light and encroaching shadows. My phone buzzed, slicing through the stillness. Caleb. My grandson's name flickered on the screen. Strange, he rarely called and never just to chat. Grandma, we're nearby. The car broke down. I'm with D'Angelo. Can we come over? His voice was rushed, edged with something I couldn't place. D'Angelo. The name struck a chord I didn't realize I'd been holding. I'd met him a handful of times. Caleb's tall, magnetic friend with a presence that filled rooms. Polite, yes, but his eyes. There was a depth to them, a quiet intensity I tried not to notice. Of course, I said, my voice steady despite the sudden tightness in my chest. I hung up and pressed a hand to my heart, its rhythm unnervingly fast. Why? It was just Caleb, just his friend, just a broken-down car. But when they arrived, D'Angelo's gaze met mine, and the air shifted. He stood in the doorway, all lean muscle and quiet confidence, his smile faint but knowing. Laura, he said, that deep voice wrapping around my name like a challenge. How've you been? Fine, elite. My voice trembled. Caleb chattered aimlessly as they settled in, but my focus lingered on D'Angelo. There was a charge between us, unspoken but undeniable. When he caught me staring, his eyes held a question, one I wasn't brave enough to answer. Later, as the house fell silent, I lay awake, restless. The memory of D'Angelo's hands, calloused from fixing the car earlier, flashed in my mind. I'd watched him work, unnoticed, struck by the way his arms flexed under the hood. Ridiculous, I scolded myself. But my body hummed with a longing I'd buried decades ago. I slipped downstairs for water, only to find him in the kitchen, leaning against the counter in a gray tee and loose shorts. The dim light caught the curve of his shoulders, the sharp line of his jaw. Can't sleep? He asked, his tone low, almost playful. I'm not used to company, I said, my grip tightening on the glass. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the warmth of his skin. Getting used to loneliness is dangerous, he murmured. My breath hitched. The air thickened, pulling us nearer. His eyes dropped to my lips, then rose to meet mine, a silent dare. My pulse roared in my ears. 1 inch closer, I thought. 1 inch, and a creak from upstairs shattered the moment. We sprang apart, breathless. Caleb. The next morning, Caleb was gone, leaving a note about visiting a friend. I stood in the hallway, torn between relief and something darker, sharper. D'Angelo's door was slightly ajar. Without thinking, I pushed it open. He lay in bed, sheets tangled around his waist, hair tousled. His eyes snapped open, locking onto mine. Caleb's gone, I said, the words leaving me before I could stop them. D'Angelo sat up slowly, his gaze unwavering. I've tried not to stare, he said. But you're hard to ignore. My heart raced. What are you saying? He reached for his phone, showing me Caleb's message. Asterisk went to visit a friend. Back later. Asterisk, then he set it down, his eyes never leaving mine. We're alone, he said simply. The unspoken hung between us, a question, a risk, a dare. I should have walked away, but the loneliness I'd carried for years suddenly felt heavier than the weight of his stare. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. D'Angelo's lips curved. You already know. And I did. The morning light spilled through the curtains, casting D'Angelo's face in gold. His words hung in the air, asterisk. There's still a long way until evening, asterisk, and the heat in his gaze made my skin prickle. I should have felt shame, regret, but all I felt was a desperate, dizzying hunger. He leaned in, his lips brushing my ear. "You're trembling," he murmured. "Is it fear? Or something else?" My breath hitched. "Does it matter?" His low laugh sent a shiver down my spine. "No, not right now." What followed was a dance of slow, deliberate touches. His fingers tracing the curve of my shoulder, the dip of my waist. Every nerve in my body hummed. When his mouth found mine again, the kiss was deeper, hungrier, as if he'd been starving for this as long as I had. The weight of his body pressed me into the mattress, and I arched into him, my hands clutching his back. "Laura," he breathed against my skin. "You have no idea how long I've wanted this." Wanted. The word echoed in my mind. Not want. Past tense. My heart clenched. "How long?" I whispered. His answer was a kiss that swallowed the question. Hours blurred. We moved through the house like ghosts, stealing moments between shadows. In the kitchen, he pinned me against the counter, his laughter warm against my neck. In the hallway, he pressed me to the wall, his hands everywhere, his voice a rasp. "You're addictive, you know that?" But it was in the stillness, the pauses between breaths, that the guilt crept in. "What are we doing?" I'd ask myself, only to have him silence the thought with a touch. By midday, we lay tangled in his sheets, the air thick with the scent of sweat and something sweeter, sharper. He traced patterns on my arm, his gaze distant. "What happens when Caleb comes back?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. D'Angelo stiffened. For a heartbeat, he was unreadable. Then he rolled onto his side, propping himself on his elbow. "Do you want this to stop?" The question cut deeper than I expected. "No," I said too quickly. But what?" He brushed a strand of hair from my face, his eyes searching mine. "You're allowed to want this, Laura. You're allowed to want me." The clock ticked toward evening. We showered together, his hands lingering as steam fogged the mirrors. When we dressed, he helped me button my blouse, his fingers brushing my collarbone. "You're beautiful," he said, simple and sincere. I closed my eyes. "Don't fall," I told myself. But it was too late. Caleb's return was marked by the crunch of gravel outside. D'Angelo froze, his hand tightening on mine. "We'll figure this out," he whispered. But as Caleb bounded into the kitchen, grinning and oblivious, I wondered if figuring it out was even possible. That night, after Caleb left for a movie, D'Angelo found me on the porch. He sat beside me, our thighs touching. "He'll be gone for hours," he said. I turned to him, the question burning. "What now?" He answered by pressing his lips to mine, gently this time. "Now," he said, "we keep going. Unless you want to stop." I didn't. The morning after, sunlight sliced through the curtains, illuminating the tangled sheets and the truth we'd woven. D'Angelo's arm draped over my waist, his breath steady against my neck. For a fleeting moment, I let myself pretend this was ordinary, that we were ordinary. But the clock ticked toward Caleb's return, and reality pressed in like a storm. "We should get up," I murmured, though my body refused to move. D'Angelo's grip tightened, his voice a rumble. Let him come. His confidence unnerved me. How could he be so calm? Every creak of the house, every distant car engine, set my nerves ablaze. Yet he lingered, tracing patterns on my skin as if we had all the time in the world. When Caleb finally returned, his laughter echoed through the hallway. D'Angelo didn't flinch. Instead, he pressed a kiss to my shoulder and slipped out of bed, pulling on his clothes with deliberate slowness. I watched him leave, my chest aching with a mix of dread and longing. The three of us sat at the kitchen table, the air thick with unspoken words. Caleb chattered about his plans for the summer, oblivious. D'Angelo's foot brushed mine under the table, a silent claim. I jerked back, my coffee sloshing in the cup. "Everything okay, Grandma?" Caleb asked, frowning. "Fine," I lied, my voice brittle. Later, when Caleb napped, D'Angelo found me in the garden. He leaned against the oak tree, his eyes dark with intent. "You're tense," he said. "Relax. He suspects nothing." Easy for you to say, I snapped. This isn't a game. His smile was slow, dangerous. Isn't it? You're the one who came to my room last night. I flushed. That was a mistake. Was it? He stepped closer, his scent, soap and something wilder, wrapping around me. Admit it, Laura. You've never felt more alive. His fingers grazed my wrist, and I shivered. He was right, but admitting it meant surrendering to the chaos. That night, as Caleb watched TV, D'Angelo lingered in the doorway of my study. Join me, he mouthed, his gaze a dare. I hesitated, then followed him upstairs. He closed the door softly, his hands finding my hips. You think too much, he whispered. Someone has to, I said, but his kiss swallowed the protest. We fell into the bed, a tangle of urgency and restraint. Afterward, he traced the line of my jaw, his touch tender. What are we doing, D'Angelo? I asked, my voice breaking. Surviving, he said simply. You've been alone too long. Let me remind you what it's like to burn. Days blurred into a dangerous rhythm. Stolen moments in closets, heated glances across dinner tables, the constant thrill of almost being caught. But guilt gnawed at me. I'd wake at dawn, haunted by memories of my husband's face. His kindness, his quiet love. How could I betray him like this? One afternoon, Caleb found me staring at an old photo. You miss him, huh? He said softly. Every day? I replied, my throat tight. He hesitated. D'Angelo's different since we got here. Quieter. You think he's okay? My heart stopped. Why wouldn't he be? Caleb shrugged. No reason. Just, he's been acting weird. Weird how? He watches you a lot, Caleb said, frowning. Like he's studying you. I forced a laugh. Don't be silly. But that night, D'Angelo's hands trembled as he held me. He knows something's wrong, he muttered. We need to be careful. Then let's stop, I whispered, though the words felt like a knife. He went still. Do you want that? The silence stretched. I couldn't answer. The storm broke the next morning. I found D'Angelo in the driveway, his phone in hand. We need to talk, he said, his voice cold. My blood turned to ice. What's wrong? He showed me a text. Asterisk Caleb's onto us. He asked questions about the car. About us. Asterisk. Panic surged. What did you tell him? The truth, D'Angelo said, his eyes hard. That the car was fine. That I've wanted you since the moment I met you. I stared, horrified. You didn't. He deserved honesty. This, we aren't a mistake, Laura. Stop acting like we are. Before I could respond, the front door slammed. Caleb stood there, his face pale. Grandma, is it true? The world tilted. D'Angelo stepped forward. Caleb, let me explain. But Caleb turned and ran. Caleb's absence carved a hole in the house, his silence louder than any accusation. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea, while D'Angelo paced the floor. His usual confidence had cracked, replaced by a restless energy that mirrored my own panic. He'll never forgive us, I said, my voice hollow. D'Angelo stopped, his jaw tightening. Do you regret it? The question hung between us, sharp and unflinching. Regret? My mind flashed to the nights tangled in his arms, the way he'd made me feel alive again. But then I saw Caleb's face, his betrayal, the shattered trust. I don't know, I whispered. When Caleb finally returned, his eyes were red-rimmed, his voice raw. How could you? He asked, not shouting, which was worse. He's my friend. And you? He choked, unable to finish. D'Angelo stepped forward. Caleb, let me explain. No. Caleb recoiled. You don't get to explain. You used me. Both of you. The word used struck like a slap. I stood, reaching for him, but he flinched away. It wasn't like that, I pleaded. I never meant to hurt you. But you did. He laughed bitterly. You've been alone, Grandma. I get it. But him. He gestured at D'Angelo. disgust etched into every syllable. He's supposed to be family.
D'Angeloès face Ardenned.
This wasn't a game. What I feel for her. Stop. Caleb's voice broke. Just stop. That night, Caleb packed his bags. I found him in the driveway, tossing a duffel into his trunk. You're leaving? I asked, my throat tight. I need space, he muttered, avoiding my gaze. I can't look at either of you right now. Caleb, please. He slammed the trunk shut. I don't know if I'll come back. Maybe don't wait up. The taillights disappeared down the road, and I crumpled against the porch railing. D'Angelo found me there, tears streaming down my face. He'll come around, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Weeks passed in a blur of silence. D'Angelo stayed, though our interactions grew strained. We tiptoed around each other, the air thick with unsaid words. One evening, he cornered me in the kitchen. This isn't working, he said, his tone resigned. I know. He gripped my shoulders, desperation flashing in his eyes. I love you, Laura, but Caleb, he's like a brother to me. I can't lose him. The word love should have comforted me. Instead, it deepened the ache. You need to choose, I said softly. He closed his eyes, a muscle ticking in his jaw. When he opened them, I already knew his answer. D'Angelo left the next morning. No dramatic goodbye, just a note on the kitchen table. Asterisk, I'm sorry. Take care of yourself. Asterisk. The house felt emptier than ever. I wandered the rooms, haunted by memories. The creak of the stairs where he'd caught my hand, the kitchen counter where our lips first met, the bed where we'd unraveled together. But it was Caleb's absence that gutted me most. His texts went unanswered. His social media went dark. I'd wake each night, clutching my late husband's pillow, wondering if I'd traded one loneliness for another. Months later, a package arrived. Inside was a photo of Caleb and D'Angelo, arms slung around each other, grinning at a beach. No note, just the image of a bond I'd unknowingly fractured. I placed it on the mantel, next to my husband's portrait. Some nights, I'd trace their faces and whisper apologies to the ghosts around me. Love, I realized, isn't always a choice, but survival is, and so I learned to live with the shadows.